This is truly a interesting and important topic that we all should be involved in discussing. It's very emotional and sensitive. You know, we all deal with death every day. And, you know, as I was bringing this to my constituents, there were a number of questions that were being asked of this bill and this phenomena of physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, and that nature. So one of the questions is terminal illness. I know in order for you to be qualified, you have to be deemed terminally ill. So the concern with that is what is considered as terminally ill? And the reason is with medication, improvement in medication today, things or categories that were considered terminally ill, you know, in some cases cancer, HIV/AIDS, there have been medication that has been that has evolved to help a person live longer in those conditions. And so I guess the concern from my community was what is the fine line? Like, what is considered terminally ill? Many doctors, or most doctors to all doctors, really cannot predict someone dying. Steve Jobs, as you know, he had an illness, pancreatic cancer. Typically 6 months is the lifespan, and he lived for the past 2 years. And so what is the definition of terminal illness? Can you expand on that?
Yes, I'm happy to answer that question. I feel like there are a lot of questions or ideas bound up in that, and I also encourage you to put that question to a physician who would be responsible for diagnosing a terminal illness. What we have seen with Death with Dignity is that you provide a statutory definition for a physician to identify a terminal illness in terms of qualifying for this law. And both physicians have to agree that that person is terminally ill based on your statutory definition. What we do know from research is that physicians can be wrong on this issue, very much. But the research demonstrates that physicians are much more likely to way overestimate how much time you have left. So they're much more likely to err on the side of hope, to give you more time, to suggest that you have longer time to live rather than less. And so the concern, and I understand this concern, the concern that we would rush a terminally ill person into using Death with Dignity doesn't bear out, because the prognosis tends to, and the research demonstrates this, tends to way overestimate how much time they have left rather than underestimate how much time they have left.
Okay. Another concern is let's say this becomes law. People are concerned about, well, what's the fine line? First, to be qualified as terminally ill. Then it might get expanded to, let's say, someone who may have a broken limb or something and cannot function in the way that they used to. Or expanded to, I don't know, I spoke to a physician. There are some who have some sexual issues in terms of performing. They might be depressed or whatever and may not want to continue with their lives. Like, what, in the past in these different states, has it been proposed that it goes beyond terminally ill patients?
In all the other states with Death with Dignity, those situations that you posit are not allowed and have not been allowed to use Death with Dignity. A person with a broken limb. That does not qualify. It has not qualified. And your statute addresses this in that a physician would face serious sanctions if he or she tried to go forward to write a prescription in this situation. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened in the last 20 years in all of the jurisdictions. And it's a slippery slope argument that has not come to pass in 20 years.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. And lastly, you mentioned that it was surveyed like elderly community, low-income community, and people of color. I want to deep dive a little bit in the
Okay.
the minorities communities. Can you tell me more of how much surveying or statistics were done in people of color community? Because I don't see much interest here from communities of color. So please tell me what's been the survey or the outcome of doing a response from those communities.
Right. I was referring to a study done by a series of researchers from around the world looking at Oregon data. And what they did was they looked at data published by the Oregon Health Authority, the Public Health Division of the Oregon Health Authority. And what the Oregon Health Authority does, and this is statutorily mandated, is that they take demographic information from individuals who use the law and issue reports about the demographic information. So the data that I was talking about, that vulnerable individuals were not at risk, was based on an analysis of that data published by the Oregon Health Authority. It wasn't, there were not studies asking people in communities of color what their public opinion about death with dignity. So that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about the demographic information released by the Oregon Health Authority.
Was there any demographic information of that type done here in the state of New York, particularly targeting people of color?
This was a post hoc analysis of the death with dignity experience in Oregon. So no, not in New York, because you don't have the law yet.
Okay, but has there been anything done in terms of involving and engaging minority communities on this topic?
On this topic,
Yes.
A tremendous amount of work has been done, and I would look to my colleagues who are from New York to talk about that later. But I do know that I was involved in the Washington D.C. law from the beginning, and we did a tremendous amount of work in Washington D.C. engaging and talking to specifically the African American community to get a deeper understanding of the experience of dying, the experience of accessing health care, the interrelationships of religion and healthcare and family related to the African American community. And that was specific to Washington, D.C.
Okay. I would just advise that this is a very important matter. When we're doing things like this, is something that will affect all communities. All communities should be involved in surveys, statistics, whatever, because we do not want to leave anyone out when we are making any type of decision. So I would certainly suggest that we do a little bit more research in including those demographics that has been left out in the research, and all these research has been done. What has been the response to just saying, okay, if someone really wants to die, admitting them to a hospice or something? What's been the response with that? Because I know that's been an argument. The alternative to a person can make a decision to just go to a hospice.
Yeah, and hospice can, if it's available, and I think all of the evidence proves that most people get into hospice 2 to 3 days before they die, so it's not an extended period of time when palliative care is being offered and provided to them. I think if hospice were more available to more people, you would see more of a decision to choose to go into hospice. But for a lot of people, hospice is terminal sedation. You're not having a quality of life. You're not able to communicate with your family members. Certain, issues arise that really are situations that people don't want to have to partake of or subject their families to. So, if hospice is available, that's absolutely an issue that is.
You were saying about the quality of life in hospice. I mean, how long typically does one stay in a hospice versus the process one would have to go through to get the physician-assisted suicide process? I mean, like,
Well,
wouldn't the hospice be a shorter term versus having to go through, all these psychologists and doctors and permissions and all this stuff? That's like, let's say that takes a couple months versus a hospice a few days.
It wouldn't necessarily take a couple of months. I mean, remember, the person who is able to avail themselves of this proposed practice are people who have a terminal illness that is incurable and irreversible. Their medical professionals with them in consultation are making decisions about when it's appropriate to go into hospice, when going to hospice doesn't do anything other than to, just pave your way to your final end. It wouldn't, as I say, I've had clients who have gone into hospice for a year and, been maintained and had a quality of life. I've had other clients go into hospice 3 days before they've died. The process here contemplates that there is involved and engaged medical professionals and that this is part of the discussion around choices at the end of life. The referral process, you need a consulting opinion from another doctor. Again, if you're a terminal person and this is on the menu of your choices, there will be consultation with the consulting physician. If there's a need for a referral for psychiatric evaluation, that also is teed up to happen. So I don't think that the process contemplated by this particular piece of legislation would run for months, years.
Okay, I think the key words that you said was incurable and irreversible.
Yes.
And again, there's been a number of illness that's been said, there's no cure for it, it's irreversible. We have, like I said, we have a lot of people who's been successfully in remission from cancer. We have a lot of people who are living with HIV, with great medication. And so that's a key thing. And that's why, to me, the definition of what's considered terminally ill.
Right.
And then also, when we think about the physicians, who are the physicians? What kind of experience do they have? Things like that. And again, it varies from communities to communities because in some communities, like in my community, our healthcare system is not the best. Okay,
Exactly.
so we got to look at all the disparities
Exactly.
across different states. Also, I wanted to also understand, where do the physicians in the state of New York feel about this? Was there, and you may have said it, or the person before you had said it, I'm sorry, but are they for this or they're not for this? I don't know.
I'm probably not best placed to
Okay.
go into where the physicians are. I understand that the Physicians Association in New York State is currently studying the issue. I know that there are a variety of organizations of physicians, primary healthcare providers who do support medical aid in dying. They were present in the Myers litigation, and they have been involved with this process across the country. They've been involved in Washington most recently, and I can get you that
Okay, I think,
information if you
again,
want. But I do
this-
agree,
right.
to your point about the quality of healthcare in New York State being completely uneven, and that is something that is very critical. We think that this bill provides safeguards for a person not to be hastened, not to be, incentivized to ask for a prescription. We think that what this bill should do is actually enhance the degree of healthcare options that are available to everyone. But that's why I am asking the legislature to seriously consider exactly what it's doing in connection with the Medicaid long-term healthcare system that is being set up, the managed care system in New York State, and to make sure that palliative care is available for people, that hospice is available, and that there is quality access to healthcare, because we understand that it is completely, in the hands of the funding mechanisms. And it's not just a federal funding stream. New York State has an independent obligation to fund medical services for New Yorkers.
Yeah, yeah, and that's my concern. I wouldn't want people in my community to have to face this as a first option because
I don't think that they would.
because of cost.
Yeah,
okay?
and I don't.
I mean, like I said, I've been a victim of being pushed out of a hospital, Columbia, New York Presbyterian. I had my child, losing my child. And they said, because of cost, we cannot take care of you. So you can go home and die, have your baby, have the baby die. And that's a very important
Right.
issue and critical matter,
Exactly.
especially in communities of color.
Exactly.
Especially for the disability also.
Exactly.
So, again, these are things that we have to take precaution and do a little bit more study. Oregon and New York State is completely different.
Well, California actually has medical aid in dying.
Yes,
and
I
they
know
are
that.
a lot more demographically similar to us, both with respect to Medicaid populations, pockets of uninsurance, locations where there really isn't health care available to people. And I do think that our bill is modeled on the California bill, and there is a very robust reporting scheme that is built into in terms, again, it's after the fact, obviously, but the state has to track to see if there are any trends or any outliers in terms of how this practice would be utilized. So there's demographic information, socioeconomics, age, gender, identification with any particular community. That is all going to be mandated for reporting. So there is thought being given exactly to ensuring that this does not become a tool to ration healthcare.